This is part 2 of French history. Start of the Franks. I'm going to first talk about the beginning of the Merovingian dynasty. The Merovingian dynasty was the first dynasty that united France into the modern state it is today. In the very beginning of the Merovingians, Gaul was still ruled by Rome. We will get into Clovis, who is considered the first king of France. But first, let's get into the Merovingian dynasty. The Franks first appeared, and now the Franks, for those of you that are just watching this for the first time, are the people who founded modern France. The name France comes from the word Franks, who were a Germanic tribe, similar to the Anglo-Saxons who were in Britain. The Franks first appeared as king of the Franks in the Roman army of northern Gaul. By 509, they had united all the Franks and northern Gaulish Romans under their rule. The name Merovingian derives from medieval Latin, Merovingia, with an added suffix, meaning sons of Merovic. Merovic is the founder of the dynasty. The Merovingians had long hair, which distinguished them among the Franks, who commonly cut their hair short. Contemporaries sometimes referred to them as the, quote, long-haired kings. A Merovingian whose hair was cut could not rule. One of their names, Clovis, evolved into Louis and remained common among French royalty down to the 19th century. Merovic was the king of the Solon Franks, a northern western subgroup of the early Franks who appeared in the historical record in the 4th and 5th century. They lived west of the Lower Rhine in what was then the Roman Empire, and today the Netherlands and Belgium. He is the founder of the Merovingian dynasty. Several myths and legends surrounded this person. He is proposed to be one of several barbarian warlords and kings that joined forces with the Romans against the Huns under Attila in 451. His grandson Clovis I became the founder of the Frankish kingdom. There is little information about him in the later histories of the Franks. Gregory of Tours, the primary source of the Franks, only names him as one of the fathers of the children. One of the difficult things about prehistory, when you're looking into the very early stages of something, like Rome, early British history, early French history, and other history, you did not have someone giving a historical account. Gregory of Tours, who is the primary source of the Merovingian dynasty, only mentioned little information about Merovich. Then you get into his son, Childeric I. The Solon Franks, in treaty with the Roman Empire, had settled in Belcia, between the Meuse and some rivers, making the capital at Tournai, southwestern Belgium today. Childeric's role as a barbarian ally of the Romans was important. He helped the Roman military commander to repel the Visigoths near Orleans in 463. Also, at the request of another Roman general, he attacked the Visigoths again in 469. Soon afterwards, he cleared Anglo-Saxon pirates from the district southwest of Orleans around Angers. This is pretty much all we really hear about Childeric. Now, the biggest difference between Childeric and Clovis I is that Childeric was more of an ally with the Roman Empire. A lot of the barbarians, which the Romans referred to any foreigners as, were more or less allies of Rome. They were given provincial governorships, they were given other protections, and they were able to use the Roman currency and trade routes. The stability of the Roman Empire really provided a lot in the early world. When Clovis, who was 15 at the time, was given heir to the throne of his father Childeric, Rome, more or less, was gone. In its place, you had the Western Roman Empire, which is called the Byzantine Empire. Syagrius was a general and the last Roman ruler of Gaul. Gaul was a region of Western Europe first described by the Romans. It was inhabited by Celtic and Antiquity tribes, encompassing present-day France, Luxembourg, Belgium, most of Switzerland, parts of northern Italy, the Netherlands, and Germany, particularly the west bank of the Rhine. The name Gaul is derived from the Celtic word Gaullus, meaning foreigner, stranger. Syagrius was defeated by King Clovis in battle. Despite being isolated from the surviving portions of the Roman Empire, Syagrius managed to maintain a degree of Roman authority in northern Gaul of 20 years, and his state outlived the end of the Western Empire itself. I gotta correct myself here. Actually, the Byzantine Empire was Eastern Rome. Western Rome fell. I'm a man of my word. I want to be historically accurate. Syagrius was a ruler of Gaul. He was a provincial ruler from Rome. Even though Rome had fallen, at least Eastern Rome, 20 years previously, he still was able to hold on to power. You have to give him credit, nonetheless, for being at least an effective ruler. He managed to hold off the neighboring Franks, who were internally divided under different kings. Upon Childeric's death in 481, his son Clovis succeeded him. Considering Clovis was only 15, Childeric seemed to have no interest or reason in overthrowing him, and that Syagrius was able to maintain order, he viewed Clovis as an afterthought. Despite this, Clovis assembled an army, issued a challenge, and met Syagrius' forces. Few details are known of the clash, the Battle of Saussions, but Syagrius was decisively defeated and fled. His domain passed to the Franks. After the battle, Syagrius escaped to the distant city of Toulouse on his horse. Toulouse was the capital of the Visigoths. He traveled a distance of 500 miles between Toulouse and northern Gaul. He had people chasing him, wanting to finish him off after the battle. Originally, Syagrius was taken in by the Visigoth king Alaric II and taken to a place where he was able to clean himself up and get something to eat. Finally, the Franks arrived and they had one demand: give up Syagrius, and there would be no bad blood between the Franks and the Visigoths. Alaric didn't want to challenge the new king of the north on behalf of a wannabe Roman ruler. So he brought Syagrius to the Franks in chains. He was thrown into Frankish prisons and heard reports every day about how his territory and kingdom was being overran by a 15-year-old boy. Eventually, Clovis quietly had him strangled and disposed of. Now, here is what I was talking about previously, but I'm just going to read verbatim what is in my notes here. The name France comes from Latin Francia, called the Franks. Originally, it applied to the whole empire of the Franks, extending from southern France to eastern Germany. Now, I'm going to divert here a little bit and get into the origin of the Franks. It's important, if you want to understand the history of France, to understand about the Franks. No one knows the origins, sort of like the founding of Rome, who they said it was Romeo and Romulus was his name, I think. It's been a while. Who were basically gods. Similar to a myth that has become a legend, the Franks have something similar. After the fall of Troy, which was the Trojan War, Brad Pitt's in the film made about that. After the fall of Troy, Priam and Anthor, two Trojan princes, embarked on ships with 12,000 of the men remaining from the Trojan army. However, this was a myth and the true origins are unknown. Now let's get to Clovis, the first king of the Franks. Now, the reason that Clovis became the first king of the Franks is because he defeated Syagrius. Instead of being an ally with Rome, Clovis wanted ultimate power over Gaul and the entire territory. That was a Roman province. The defeat of Syagrius is a historical divide. Sautians, though independent and isolated, had been the last Gallic possession of the Roman Empire. When Clovis added it to the Frankish kingdom, the history of France begun. In Sautians, Clovis demonstrated that he was more than an aggressive warrior. He set out to win over his new subjects, both Frankish and Gallo-Roman, so that he could count on their allegiance. From the beginning of his career of conquest, he forbade his soldiers to loot, and he left the majority of Gallo-Romans in their administrative post. Some landowners were displaced so he could reward his most trusted companions, and some treasure was taken to help finance the cost of the next advance. Since Clovis had no possessions, there was no atrocity. The only power in Clovis's century was power of the king. The king saw a conquered people as crucial attribute of a successful kingdom. The old Gallo-Roman families managed, with the approval of Clovis, to preserve much of the estates, and under the law, they were in most respects equal to their conquerors. Clovis's realm now included the cities of Sautians, Paris, Rouen, Rome, Leroy, and west to the borders of Almonica. The rest of the northwestern territory, which Clovis succeeded in unifying under his single rule, came in later generations to be known as Neustera, New Land. After Sautians, Clovis proceeded to annex some of the petty principalities around his northern and eastern edges, and to exterminate their rulers. These were Frankish chieftains like himself, some of them related to him but lacking his brisk initiative. They included the kings of Thermone, Tongres, and Thurgundia. By 491, he had most of Gaul, Belcia, and some of Germanian Inferior under his control, and had disposed of some potentially troublesome cousins. Any competent ruler, whether it was the Romans, as I talked about previously in part 1, the Greek Empire, any empire you can think of that lasted for a long time, knew that in order to appease the conquered, you needed to pretty much leave everything the same. Let them continue their religion, let them continue their governorships, as long as they would accept the new king as their ruler, and as long as they would pay taxes. The reason that Clovis was so successful, in part to being a brilliant guy, is that he was pragmatic. He knew that when he conquered a territory, like the Romans, like Caesar did a few centuries before in Gaul, in order to get the people on his side, he had to keep things pretty much the same. In 469, the 15th year of his reign, Clovis was faced with a genuine danger. And we'll get into this in the next video. I want to keep every video around 15 minutes long. That's because this has a controversy. Gregory of Tours was the main historian who talked about the Franks. He was a Christian, therefore he was biased for the Christian narrative. Don't get me wrong, I'm a believer myself. However, I am a fan of accuracy, and to be accurate, we have to get into the myth and the legend of the next phase of Clovis in 469.